Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero and I'll be your host this evening. If you're new to the channel, I'm a low stakes specialist who's been a professional poker player for over a decade and a half. I've been playing in Las Vegas for about 9 years now. So if you're looking to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em, you've come to the right place. Here on my channel, I dissect every notable hand I play and give you the mental process that goes behind every move that I make. This session takes place on Friday night on February the 15th. Although technically it's Saturday morning since it's after midnight. I had just finished a short session with the team from the Absolute Nuts crew on their live stream. If you're unaware, I play almost every weekend on a live stream called the Absolute Nuts. If you haven't heard of them, make sure you check out their YouTube channel. They run the craziest 5-5 private game in all of Las Vegas and constantly feature celebrities and poker legends like Andrew Nemi, Michael Mizrachi, and Frankie C. I was supposed to make a collab with Gazzy B on this night, the man, the legend known as Gary Blackwood. But his flight came in super late and he was too exhausted to participate, so I just headed over to my usual haunt at the Win Encore to play some 2-5 no limit hold'em, where I buy in for 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. We start the session at 4:32 in the morning. One of the first hands I get dealt, there's a live 10. Normally I would open raise here, but I'm just getting settled in, so I limp in the middle position with 7-9 of clubs. Everyone folds around to the big blind, who raises to 50 with a stack of about 1,400. The straddle folds, and I make the call. The flop comes deuce, 9, 3, rainbow with one club. We flop top pair with a backdoor flush draw on an otherwise pretty darn dry board. Big blind c-bets another 50. No real option here other than to call. The turn brings in a king of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. My opponent checks, and I check as well. There's no real reason to fire here. If our opponent has a king, or even just a bigger 9, we want a free card to catch up. So the river comes, and it brings in a 5 of hearts. We don't improve. Ace-4 makes a straight. My opponent suddenly comes out firing for $60 into the pot of 210. Okay, so pay close attention to the amount that he chose. He's trying to take us to Value Town. An argument can be made to simply call here, since my hand does have quite a bit of showdown value. However, consider the hands I'm beating. Would pocket 8s bet here? Pocket 7s? What combinations of a 9 am I beating? I lose to 8-9 suited, 9-10 suited, ace-9 suited. I'm obviously losing to a king as well. Now consider, if my opponent had ace-4 and gotten super lucky with a gut shot on the river, do you think he would only bet $60 into the pot of 210? I think I only have a pure bluff catcher here against random ace-high types of hands. I think the more likely hands my opponent could be holding are hands like a bigger 9, pocket 10s, or even pocket jacks. However, all of those hands are going for pretty thin value, so instead of just calling here and winning a small proportion of the time that my opponent is just purely bluffing, I'm going to switch things up and show my opponent why I'm such an exploitative, profitable player. I raise the action up to a terrifying pot-sized bet of 260. Our opponent begins to tank, which indicates he was not in fact bluffing. I don't know about you, but against that dry flop, if I'm holding a hand like 10s or jacks, and I face this sort of massive resistance on the river, I know I'm certainly folding. Smells like a river straight to me. My opponent eventually agrees with my logic and lets his hand go. Before the start of this next hand, I move to a new 6-handed table. Oftentimes, as soon as I sit down to the poker table, I immediately check out the other tables available and try to look for one with the least number of familiar faces. As I've often preached on my channel, playing poker profitably is not about comparing sausages. It's not about proving you're better than other pros. If you want to play poker profitably, you want to find the softest table possible in the stakes that you play. You want to dominate, and proper table selection should be an important asset in your arsenal. So here, the middle position opens to 15. The table is short, and I have positioned to the original raiser, so I put in the call with Queen 10 offsuit and the low jack. The small blind calls as well. We go 3-handed in position to a flop of Queen 9-6 with a spade and 2 diamonds. Both opponents check to me. Normally I would bet with top pair here, but once in a while I like to protect my check back range. There's no way I can possibly get 3 streets of value with my top pair and mediocre kicker against a weaker hand anyways. So here I elect to check the action through. If I were closer to the top of my range with a hand like King Queen, that would be a different story. So the turn comes and it's a 5 of hearts. 7-8 makes the nuts. Both opponents check to me for a second time. I figure it's about time to go for a little bit of value, so I shoot out a slightly over half pot bet of 30 into the $50 pot. The small blind calls, but the middle position folds. The river brings in an inconsequential 3 of spades. Small blind checks for a third time. I continue going for value with another slightly over half pot bet of 60. If our opponent missed his draw, he's not calling anything. But this price point incentivizes a 9 to put in the money. Surely enough, our opponent makes the call. We table our hand, and it's good. It's a full 45 minutes before I play my next notable hand. Here, everyone folds to the button, who opens for 20 with a 3K starting stack. Small blind makes the call. I look down at King Jack of diamonds in the big blind and consider my options. As you guys know, button opens against the blinds can be extremely wide. I've showcased in another video where I can open as light as deuce 3 offsuit and similar garbage. I would normally 3-bet here with my current hand holding, maybe about 75% of the time. However, here I'm going to deviate for a couple of reasons. Our opponent chose a $20 open size instead of the standard 15. I haven't been on the table very long, but our opponent has a 3K stack, which is much larger than everyone else on the table. He looks like a young European in his late 20s. I'm going to use the visual assessment of his chip stack, along with his visual appearance, to make a quick judgment call that he's likely a Euro pro. I don't want to 3-bet light, out of position, with a mediocre hand against a fellow professional, so I decide to under-rep my hand and just call. The flop comes deuce, king 7, rainbow with 1 diamond. We flop top pair with a decent kicker and a backdoor flush draw. This is about as dry of a flop as you can possibly ask for. Small blind checks. I decide to check as well to see what Mr. Europro wants to do. He puts in a continuation bet of $20 into the pot of 60. Small blind folds. Now, if you think this is a weak bet, and therefore our opponent has to have a weak hand, you could potentially be gravely mistaken here. If you were our opponent on the button, and you had a hand here like a set of deuces or a set of sevens, your opponents are drawing pretty close to dead, aren't they? This board is pretty darn polarizing. There aren't any draws of any sort. There isn't even a gut shot draw. So this $20 bet can be either incredibly strong or incredibly weak. With me holding a king here, I think one of us is drawing really badly here, and if that person is me, I don't want to bloat the pot up any further. So I just put in a flat call. The turn brings in a 6 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board, which I really like seeing. If our opponent had us beat with a hand like king queen or ace king, we just gained some massive outs with our backdoor flush draw. If our opponent were bluffing, then I would want him to continue bluffing. Our risk has just been reduced dramatically. The only hand we're realistically concerned about now would be 6-7 suited, which just made 2 pairs on the turn. So I check again. Suddenly, our opponent dials up the heat dramatically. He goes from a 3rd pot bet on the flop to firing out a massive 80% pot bet on this turn card. Most recreational players don't play in this fashion. This is definitely the style a lot of professionals use, where they bet tiny on the flop regardless of whether they actually have anything, and then fire out massive on the turn to get most hands to fold. Sometimes it's done by a hand that actually increased in equity on the turn, for instance with a hand like 8-9, or a hand that also picked up the same backdoor flush draw. Regardless, our opponent is now showing a lot of strength, so with our current hand holding, we should only call here. If we were actually closer to the top of our range, for instance, if we were the ones holding the pocket 7s here, now might be the point where we'd want to throw in a sizable raise. The only exception would be if we had more information on our opponent and we knew he's the type to fire out 3-barrel bluffs with complete air. In that case, I would advocate just a smooth call, even with pocket 7s here. Yes, there is a backdoor flush draw out there, but that's realistically the only hand you have to worry about. If you're always check raising with your monstrous hands just because a potential draw appears, you're never going to make the max amount of money against thinking players capable of making massive folds like overpairs. So here, since I do not actually have pocket 7s, and I also do not have a whole ton of information about our opponent, I just make the call. The river brings in a 10 of spades. 8-9 makes the nuts with a backdoor straight. With only top pair and a mediocre kicker, I check again. Unsurprisingly, our opponent throws out a toe-curling, massive overbet to the tune of $350 into the pot of $260. I highly doubt he's doing this with ace-king or a similar one-pair type of holding. He might think we're capped, since up until this point we've only been check calling. The vast majority of recreational players would fold at this point with just a king. I don't think he realizes that I'm a fellow professional, and I could have a hand here as strong as a set of sevens. It's also true that our opponent is more likely to be holding a hand like 8-9 here than for us to be holding such a hand, since he could have c-bet the flop with his entire range. So realistically, our opponent is saying he either has a set of sevens, 8-9 for the nut straight, or 6-7 for the turn 2 pairs. Okay, now let's shift the spotlight. If you had such a hand, and you think your opponent is capped to a one pair type of holding, would you ever throw out a massive Molotov cocktail at your opponent for value, knowing that the vast majority of players will fold all their one pair types of holdings? Because I know I certainly wouldn't. So to me, this just smells like a bluff from a fellow professional. I know it's a lot of money for my hand holding. I know I can find better spots and easier opponents to battle. But if you sit there and think like that with those sorts of meek thoughts, you may never find those better spots you dream about. So I take only about 8 seconds between when my opponent makes the bet until when I throw in the money for a call. I think my logic is pretty sound. Our opponent flips over Jack 9 of hearts for the good old-fashioned no pair, no draw, triple barrel bluff. So we take down this really sizable pot with only a mediocre hand because we weren't afraid to put our money in light. Let's say we arrived at this river by slow playing a set of sevens. I actually would only advise a check call, because that 10 on the river is actually not a safe card. With the sizing of our opponent's bet, he's saying either he has the nuts or nothing. You're not getting a call out of a missed draw, and you're going to find yourself in a really disgusting spot if you check raise and then you get jammed on. The very next hand, the under the gun and button both limp. I raised to 30 in the small blind with ace-king offsuit, charging a bit more than a standard open since I'm out of position and we also have 2 limpers in this pot. The big blind, under the gun, and button all call, so we go 4 ways out of position to flop of ace, jack 5 with 2 hearts. We flop top pair with top kicker and a backdoor straight draw. Now, this may look like a great flop, but it's somewhat coordinated. There's the obvious flush draw. Ace 5 suited and ace jack, whether suited or not, are also both very commonly played hands for our pre-flop raise amount. So instead of going girls gone wild here, I start with a half pot bet of 65 to do some information gathering. The big blind calls, the under the gun folds, but then suddenly the button jams for his entire short stack of about $430. Now, if our opponent were someone who's known to be tight, namely Joe or Gao, who both play at the win, I would just fold here. We are barely ahead of combo draws like 10 queen of hearts or ace x of hearts. We lose to ace jack, ace 5, and a set of 5s. However, I saw this self-same opponent put in his whole stack only 5 minutes ago on a 10 high rainbow flop, holding only 10 jack after the original raiser threw out an overbet. So yeah, this is not exactly someone I would qualify as a tight player. So I make the call, and the big blind gets out of the way. I would also make this self-same call against an unknown player as well. So the turn brings in a 9 of diamonds, and the river is a 4 of diamonds. The flush draw misses. Unfortunately, our opponent flips over ace jack for top 2 pairs. We lose a pretty considerable pot immediately after only just gaining these chips. Well, that sucked. Don't let it get to you though. That's just how poker goes. Shrug it off and move on. Hey, what's up guys? So I'm going to try to do these inserts a little bit more often so you guys get to know the man behind the mask, the guy who's been giving you all the poker tricks and tips on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. So you may or may not have noticed I have some of these trophies in the back there. About a year and a half ago, my daughter joined Taekwondo. We were trying to encourage her to do some extracurricular activities. And all throughout my childhood, I love martial arts. I've never taken any official classes or tutelage or anything. It's all self-trained, but you notice I like to drop like Van Damme or Steven Seagal inserts into my videos sometimes. I grew up with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo, Rocky Balboa actor, and of course Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee as some of my childhood movie star heroes. So I loved martial arts. So when my daughter joined Taekwondo, I wanted to get involved a little bit. And I asked the instructors, like, what belt do I have to be to participate in sparring? And they said, you have to be at least yellow belt, because, we don't want you getting hurt or whatever. And I said, okay, so how long does it take to be a yellow belt? And they said, maybe just a couple weeks. I said, okay, sure. I can, invest that much time. So I joined and quickly became a yellow belt and did some of their tournaments. And I let the instructors know from the beginning, I said, I'm just going to let you know I'm extremely knowledgeable when it comes to sparring. Like, I've never taken any official classes, but when it comes to sparring, consider me like probably better than all your black belts. So I joined these tournaments, and after they saw me in class, they permitted me to spar with the black belts and compete against the black belts. So I joined a couple of tournaments, and I'll show you a couple of pictures I have here. My wife will put them up. And I utterly just destroyed the black belt competition I sparred with. First, they put me in similar age category, and I didn't think that was very fair because I'm turning 46 this year, but I mean, I'm in really great shape. I don't look anything near 46, and I didn't think it was fair for me competing with my age category. So I'm like, no, throw me with the 20-year-olds. Give me your best. Give me your youngest and best. So they allowed me to compete with the 20-year-olds, and there were second degree, third degree black belts, and I took first as well. And it was really funny because the announcer would be like, okay, so this is the 20 to 25 division black belt, second to third degree. Oh, and this 45-year-old yellow belt. They had to throw me in there as well, So I just wanted to toss that little tidbit out, give you a little bit more of my background every video. And just also, don't forget, guys, if you want to play online poker, maybe you don't have that much time. A lot of my viewers have mentioned they don't live anywhere near a place they can play poker. If you just, you want to play a little bit of online poker, maybe you don't have, you only have enough time while you're dropping a deuce and you just got 30 minutes. You don't have to drive to the casino. Hop on to Club GG Poker, and I'll put the links below, and you can play with me, play with North Cal Poker. I'll see you guys soon.
15 minutes later, the table has since filled up. So we start this hand 8-handed. I open to 20 in the hijack with ace-king offsuit. The button 3-bets me to 60 with a short stack of about 450. Everyone else folds. I'm not about to call here out of position against a short stack, especially considering I'm only going to hit 1 in 3 flops on average. And in the event that I do hit, I'm not going to get paid off with a hand like pocket jacks or pocket queens or something. So I just ship in my entire stack. Our opponent makes the call. We go to a pretty amazing flop, which comes in the form of ace-king-3 rainbow. The turn is a 6 of clubs, and the river is a king of diamonds, giving us the second nuts. We win the hand. I didn't have to wait very long before ace-king vindicated us after that last embarrassing loss to ace-jack. It's a full hour before we play our next notable hand. Here, the low jack limps. I race to 30 in the hijack with a couple of red jacks. That's right, the pocket jacks that nobody knows how to play. So here, the button, small blind, big blind, and low jack all call. We go freaking 5-handed to flop, which comes out pretty damn nice. It's jack-king-3 with a spade and 2 diamonds. The action checks to me. On a board this coordinated, with 4 other opponents, flopping middle set is like perfect. I prefer it to flopping top set. This opens up the possibility that one of our opponents could be holding a hand here like king-queen or ace-king. There's the obvious flush draw and multiple Broadway draws. For instance, if someone were holding a hand like queen-10 suited. So I don't mess around and fire out a 2/3 pot-sized bet of 100 into the pot of 150. This is not the type of board I want to fire small into. The button calls with a stack of about 1300, but everyone else folds. The turn is a 5 of clubs, which is as safe as it gets. A hand like ace-4 or ace-deuce of diamonds does pick up increased equity, however. On board textures like this, especially when we're out of position, I really do not mess around. If our opponent were holding a hand like queen-10 of diamonds, queen-9 of diamonds, ace-queen of diamonds, or one of the other 2 diamond draws I just mentioned, they actually have massive outs to beat us. Our set is not safe without the proper protection here. Protection which I did not use when I joined my wife in the breeding pits, which is why we have 2 kids. I have since learned from those lessons. So to avoid a catastrophe on the river, I fire out a near pot-sized bet of 300 into the pot of 350. Our opponent quickly makes the fold, but that's okay. I'd rather play appropriately and be thankful for a $220 win than to try to milk my opponent for a small amount, only to give him a full double up on the river because I got too greedy. Remember guys, it's better to win a little than to lose a lot. There are also certain board textures where you can bet small, but this was not one of them. 20 minutes later, the hijack limps. The cutoff, a fellow professional named Neil, raises to 25 with a full stack of 1500. Now, Neil is a very interesting character. His country of origin is somewhat questionable, so oftentimes he'll get asked where he comes from, and he'll always answer very truthfully that he comes from his mom. So here the small blind calls, but I 3-bet to 105 in the big blind with pocket jacks again. The hijack folds, the cutoff calls, and the small blind folds as well. So we go heads up, out of position against a fellow professional. It's a flop that isn't as pretty as the last one. It's ace, queen, 8, rainbow. This is pretty much game over. Any ace X type of hand beats us. Pocket queens has us drawing pretty close to dead, and even a hand like queen king suited just caught up. So I check, with full intentions of folding to the smallest of bets. Thankfully, Neil checks the action back. That isn't completely telling though. Our opponent could very easily have pocket queens here. So the turn is a 6 of spades, putting 2 spades on board. We neither improve nor pick up any additional equity. So I decide to throw out an extremely small bet of $50 into the pot of 260 to deny some equity to hands we're still beating, like pocket 10s, 8-9 suited, or something similar. Yes, this does seem like an extremely weak bet, but keep in mind I also do this with hands like pocket aces or pocket queens to provoke our opponents into making a mistake. You guys have seen me trap quite a few opponents making the same exact move with absolute monsters. So for our unrealistic 5th pot bet of 50, Neil makes the call. Okay, so we can rule out pocket queens. He would have raised by now. The river is a 9 of clubs. Okay, so at this point I have a couple of options. I can go for either an absolutely massive bet and turn our hand into a bluff, or I can just check the action back and hope we win against a hand like pocket 10s or something similar. We don't beat a whole lot with this run out. A large bet can get a naked queen to fold, but ace king is still calling. 8-9 is calling. Pocket 9s is definitely calling. I'm not committed a whole lot, and this pot is relatively small, so I decide to just check with my 3rd pair, since I think there are way more hands that will call us that have us beat than hands that we can get to lay down. So when I check, Neil checks as well. I table our hand, and not surprisingly, it's no good. Neil flips over pocket kings. Pocket freaking kings. The ace magnets. That was one of the hands we could have gotten to fold. It's alright though. It was a pretty small pot. I'm just thankful the flop didn't come out king jack, like it did the last time we were holding pocket jacks only 20 minutes ago. The very next hand, the under the gun, low jack, and button all limp. I raised to 40 in the small blind with pocket aces. Pocket freaking rockets. The William Wallace of medieval warfare. Notice, I've adjusted my raise amount to accommodate for the multiple limpers as well as my bad position. So, for this price, only the under the gun and button call. The flop comes 3-8-3 rainbow. This is an extremely polarizing board and a very welcome one to see. If we're ahead, our opponents only have 2 outs at best. There are no straight draws or flush draws of any kind. If I had a hand here like just ace high, I would bet small here. Maybe do another 3rd pot bet of like 45. The odds that one of our opponents hit this kind of flop is pretty slim, and even so, we still have 6 outs to improve against like a naked 8 or a small pocket pair. With my monstrous overpair, however, I decide to get a little sneaky and let one of our opponents catch up. So I start with a check. Unfortunately, the action checks around. The turn is an 8 of diamonds, putting a 2nd diamond on board as well as pairing top pair. This is not my ideal turn card. Let's see what our other opponents would like to do. I do a bit of pot control and check again. Thankfully, both opponents check the action through. I think one of them would have bet the flop if they had an 8 though. So the river brings in a queen of spades. Okay, finally. This is more of a card I wanted to see. A small card would have been much more dangerous, because someone holding a small pocket pair might have made a boat. But this queen should be completely safe. I come out firing nearly full pot, targeting someone with a queen by throwing out a bet of 125 into the pot of 135. Under the gun folds, but the button raises me to 400. He's our opponent with the ace-jack earlier that beat our ace-king. He's sitting there with a stack of about 1,000 or so. There's no reason to raise here. I was very specifically targeting a queen. If we jam, most queens will fold, especially considering we're holding pocket aces, decreasing the likelihood our opponent could have a hand like ace-queen. But an 8 or a 3 will definitely call, and I really don't want to take myself to value town. So instead, I just snap call. Our opponent flips over queen 9 of clubs for an extremely overzealous weak queen. We table our American Airlines to win this sizable pot.
Gotcha, bitch!
Getting revenge on our opponent for his short-lived victory earlier. This wouldn't have been possible if I weren't so keenly aware of which boards I can slow play a single pair on and which boards I'm not willing to slow play even with a set. Hey guys, super quick insert. If you join Club GG, either of my clubs, either the Cheddar Club or the High Roller Club between now and the end of the month, as long as you accrue $50 in rake, which should take like no time at all, maybe like an hour or two online, I'll enter you into a drawing at the end of the month. I'll give away $500 to one lucky winner. All you need is $50 in rake. And at the end of the year, this is going to be the huge one. Everyone who accrues $100 in rake, for every $100 you accrue, I'll give you a raffle ticket. At the end of the year, I'm going to give someone $5,000. That's right, $5,000. You get one entry for every $100 of rake you accrue in one of my clubs. Hope to see you there. A few minutes later, the middle position calls dark. I raise to 15 in the low jack with ace-6 of diamonds. The hijack, cutoff, button, and big blind all call. So we go 5 ways to flop a 4-2 ace with 2 diamonds and a club. We flop top pair with a terrible kicker, but we did flop the nut flush draw. Big blind checks. I don't want to value own myself against a bigger ace, so with 3 opponents behind me yet to act, I start with a check. Plus, if we hit our flush, no one will put us on such a monster since we didn't throw out a continuation bet. Thankfully, the action checks around. The turn is a jack of spades. Big blind checks again. I think it's about time we go for some value. We're not afraid of the flush draw since it's actually a hand we're holding. So I throw out a slightly smaller than half pot bet of 35 into the $80 pot. Even for this small bet, only the button calls, with a short stack of about 200 behind. The river brings in a deuce of clubs, which I'm a pretty big fan of. It pairs the bottom pair. No, we didn't get there with our flush draw, but we now chop against the vast majority of larger ace-x holdings. We're beating a jack, but we didn't play this hand like we're holding an ace. So I throw out a very confident 2/3 pot bet of 100 into the pot of 150. Unfortunately, our opponent makes the fold, but I wanted to give you guys an example of how I play this sort of hand when I flop top pair with a nut flush draw, but my kicker isn't anything to write home about, especially when I'm out of position. About 15 minutes later, we've lost a player, so now we're only 7-handed going into this one. Everyone folds to the button, who limps. He's our opponent from earlier who paid us off with queen 9 against our aces. So I decide to juice up the pot a little bit with the raise to 15 with queen 10 of spades in the small blind. The big blind and button both call, so we go 3 ways out of position to a beautiful flop of ace, queen, queen, rainbow. We flop trip queens with a relatively decent kicker considering we were in the blind. I start with a check. Big blind checks as well, but the button surprises us in a good way by throwing out a slight overbet to $50. There are no draws of any kind other than a gut shot Broadway draw, and we're holding a very dangerous 10 in case one of our opponents has a hand like King Jack, so there's no reason to raise here. I make the call, but the big blind folds. The turn is the deuce of clubs. I check again. Unfortunately, our opponent throws out a very disappointing, stagnant bet of another $50. I think he has a weak ace and is drawing to 2 outs at best, so again, I only flat call. The river is an 8 of hearts, not a card we're really concerned about. I check for a 3rd time. Our opponent fires out a 3rd bullet for yet another stagnant bet of 50 into the now very bloated pot of 245. We know this opponent likes to play a lot of weak hands, overvalues top pair, and doesn't like folding. So with no more cards to come, I finally spring my trap and put in a check raise to 300. We're hoping to get a call out of whatever weird ace he's holding, or possibly even a weak queen. Against a more dangerous opponent, I would err on the side of caution with my mediocre queen, but not against this guy. Sadly, he folds almost immediately, but we were still able to get 3 streets of betting from him. For the last hand of the night, I opened to 15 under the gun with pocket 8s. Each and every single player on the table calls. We go 7-handed in this family pot to flop of 6-2-7 with 2 hearts and a diamond. We somehow managed to flop an overpair. Small blind checks, but the big blind comes out firing full pot, betting 100 into the pot of 105. He's our opponent from the last hand, as well as many others this session. Yes, we have an overpair here, and our hand is very unlikely to improve, but raising here would be a mistake. We still have 4 players behind us yet to act, and the big blind has already done a good job of eliminating the competition with this pot size bet. We don't need to raise here to protect our hand. Against a bet sizing this huge, just flat calling here denotes a heck of a lot of strength. I would flat call here with just about every overpair, including aces. If any opponent behind us raises, I'm just going to get out of the way. That's only ever going to be a set or 2 pairs at the very least. Thankfully, everyone else folds, and we keep in the one target we love doing battle with. The turn brings in a 6 of spades, pairing middle pair. Again, our opponent shoots out another stagnant bet of 100. Again, there's no reason to raise here. We have position, and I suspect our opponent is only drawing to 5 outs with whatever 7x he's holding. I don't want to scare him off from making a river bet, so again I just flat call. The river is not so pretty. It's a 10 of hearts. 8-9 makes a straight, and the very obvious flush also gets there. Scare cards be damned, our opponent fires yet another stale bet of 100. I'm getting the exact same feeling as when the flop came ace, queen, queen, and our opponent kept firing 3 stale stagnant bets. His first shot seems incredibly strong, but his next bullets get consecutively weaker in comparison to the pot. He also just keeps firing without any regards as to what I might be calling with. Surely there's almost no chance a naked 7 is any good here with regards to the board texture. But just like there was no reason for him to fire 3 bullets on that ace queen queen board, and there was no reason for him to raise me when a queen hit the river on that 3-3-8-8 board when he was only holding a weak queen, our opponent is only concerned about his own hand. If our opponent rivered a flush here, I think he would have gone much, much bigger, as opposed to his technique of shooting out the same 3 exact bets. So I decided to throw out an extremely thin value raise here, targeting very specifically a naked 7. We're talking like wafer thin. I cannot beat a 10, I cannot beat a 6, I cannot beat the flush or the straight. Heck, I can't even beat a hand like pocket 9s. However, if you guys watch enough of my vlogs, you should have witnessed by now that I'm extremely good at putting my opponents on very precise hand holdings. So here I raise my opponent's $100 bet to $250. He quickly makes the call. We table our hand, and he flips over Queen 7 offsuit for one of the very specific hands we're capable of beating and milking value from. After this hand, our eccentric opponent leaves, so I figure it's a good time to take off as well. In for $1,800, since I had to rebuy for $300, losing to insignificant hands that didn't make the vlog, and out for $33.14, for a delicious profit of $1,514 after only 3 hours and 25 minutes of playtime. If you guys like what you saw today, don't forget to smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. Join our Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. For a modest fee, I give you access to all of the many coaching videos I've made so far. Check out my Instagram for up-to-date pictures on my sessions, long before they've turned into vlogs. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.